When most Americans think back on Britain's air war in World War II, one airplane comes to mind almost instantly: the Supermarine Spitfire. Its sleek wings, elegant lines, and stirring reputation as a dogfighter made it the darling of the press and the public. The Spitfire became more than a machine. It became a symbol of courage, glamour, and defiance in the face of the Luftwaffe. But while the Spitfire captured the headlines, another line of fighters quietly carried much of the burden. These were the Hawker machines: the Hurricane, the Typhoon, and eventually the Tempest. They lacked the Spitfire's glamorous image, but on the battlefield, they were every bit as vital and, in some cases, even more decisive. The Hurricane, for instance, was the true workhorse of the Battle of Britain, flying more sorties and scoring more kills than the Spitfire. Yet history remembers it as the less attractive sibling. The Typhoon that followed was faster, heavier, and armed to strike at enemy armor and convoys, though it struggled at higher altitudes. And then came the Tempest, the ultimate form of Hawker's vision, a machine that could rip apart Germany's so-called superweapons in the final years of the war. So while the Spitfire stood in the spotlight, Hawker's fighters fought in the shadows, unsung yet indispensable to victory. As Britain looked beyond the Hurricane, engineers at Hawker knew the war would demand something stronger, faster, and more heavily armed. The Hurricane had carried the day in 1940, but by the late 30s its design was already showing its age. Sidney Cam and his team pushed ahead with a successor that could harness the latest power plants, massive 24-cylinder engines promising well over 2,000 horsepower. Two parallel projects took shape: the Type R, later called the Tornado, fitted with the Rolls-Royce Vulture, and the Type N, powered by the Napier Sabre. On paper, both were formidable, but in practice, the Tornado faltered. The Vulture engine proved unreliable, and the design was abandoned. That left the Sabre-driven Type N, soon renamed the Typhoon, to carry Hawker's hopes forward. At low altitudes, the Typhoon was a beast, screaming along at over 400 miles an hour, tearing into tanks, trains, and troop columns, with 4 20mm cannons and racks of rockets or 1,000-pound bombs. But as an interceptor, it disappointed. Its climb rate was poor, and above 20,000 feet performance fell off badly. Luftwaffe fighters flying high and fast could leave it behind with ease. Still, war often rewards adaptability. The Typhoon found its niche, skimming treetops and blasting targets on the ground, becoming one of the Allies' most feared fighter bombers. Yet even as it proved its worth in that role, Hawker's designers were already sketching improvements, searching for a way to overcome the Typhoon's shortcomings. Out of that search would come the most powerful low-altitude fighter of the entire war, the Hawker Tempest. Conceived as a thorough reworking of the Typhoon, it aimed to turn a rugged, low-level brawler into a faster, more refined fighter that could stand toe-to-toe with the Luftwaffe at any altitude. Sidney Cam and his design team knew the Typhoon's strengths, but they also knew its limits. To overcome them, they started with the wing. The Typhoon's thick, blunt wing was fine for tearing across the treetops, but it created drag and sapped performance at higher altitudes. The new Tempest wing would be thinner, longer, and sleeker, closer in feel to the Spitfire's graceful shape, though not a direct copy. Less drag meant more speed, cleaner handling, and a chance to unlock the potential the Typhoon had never quite reached. The chin radiator was the next to go. That large air scoop, so distinctive on the Typhoon, was replaced by radiators hidden neatly inside the wing roots. The result was a sharper nose profile, more reminiscent of the Hurricane. But design changes always bring trade-offs. The thinner wing left no room for fuel tanks, cutting into the aircraft's range. Hawker solved it by stretching the fuselage and adding a new tank behind the cockpit. It was a compromise, but a workable one. By November 1941, the proposal, known internally as P-1012, was on the Air Ministry's desk. First called the Typhoon Mark II, it was soon judged different enough to deserve its own identity. By 1942, Britain's newest fighter had a name, the Hawker Tempest. With the Tempest officially born, the next challenge was to decide how it would be powered. The Air Ministry, wary of putting all its faith in a single engine, asked Hawker to test the airframe with several different power plants. The result was a family of Tempests, each one promising something slightly different. The Tempest Mark I was the boldest on paper. Powered by the Napier Sabre IV, it looked the cleanest, with its radiators buried inside the wings. In test flights, it reached an astonishing 466 miles an hour at 24,500 feet, making it one of the fastest piston-driven fighters in the world. But the Sabre IV proved unreliable, and without a dependable engine, the Mark I never moved beyond prototypes. That left the Tempest Mark V to take the lead. Using the older Sabre II and retaining the Typhoon's chin radiator, it lacked the elegance of the Mark I, but made up for it with practicality. Top speed ran between 426 and 435 miles an hour, with excellent performance at low altitudes, exactly where the Allies needed it. This would become the main wartime production version, built in the hundreds. The Tempest Mark II offered something new again, a powerful Bristol Centaurus radial engine. Thanks to lessons learned from captured German FW-19Os, its cooling system was efficient, and performance was superb. 440 miles an hour at 15,000 feet, with a service ceiling around 37,500 feet. Pilots liked its smoother ride and quieter engine, though production delays meant it played second fiddle to the Mark V. Finally came the Tempest Mark VI, essentially a refined Mark V adapted for hot, dusty climates with stronger cooling and air filters. Altogether, fewer than 1,400 Tempests of all types were built, but every one of them carried the DNA of Hawker's ultimate fighter. By the time the Tempest Mark V reached squadrons in early 1944, the war over Europe was entering a new phase. The Luftwaffe was battered but far from finished, and Germany had begun unleashing new terror weapons against British cities. Chief among them was the V-1 flying bomb, an unmanned rocket that screamed across the channel at more than 400 miles an hour, hugging the treetops and leaving little time for interception. Most Allied fighters struggled to catch the V-1s. The Spitfire could just manage it in its later marks, and the Mustang and Thunderbolt had the speed, but not always at the right altitude. The Tempest, however, seemed purpose-built for the job. Fast, stable, and deadly at low levels, it could slip in behind the pulsing jet exhaust of the flying bomb and shred it with a burst from its 420mm cannons. Between June and September of 1944, Tempest squadrons destroyed between 638 and 800 V-1s, more than any other type. It was grueling, high-pressure work, but it saved countless lives on the ground. And once the V-1 threat began to fade, Tempest pilots turned to more traditional combat. Here, too, the airplane proved its worth. In air-to-air fighting, the Tempest scored roughly 240 kills against enemy aircraft for only about 30 losses, an impressive 8-to-1 ratio. Its speed at low and medium altitudes made it a match for late-war German fighters, while its heavy armament tore apart trains, trucks, and armor in ground attack missions. Losses were heavier in those low-level strikes, often due to flak and ground fire. But the Tempest quickly earned a reputation as one of the toughest, most feared fighters in the skies over Europe. Yet the Tempest's greatest test came not against rockets or piston engine fighters, but against Germany's late-war wonder weapons. As 1944 turned into 1945, the Luftwaffe fielded jet aircraft that seemed on paper untouchable. The sleek Messerschmitt Me-262 could top 560 miles an hour, leaving most Allied fighters in its wake. The tiny Heinkel, He-162, rushed into production as a so-called people's fighter, could reach 520 miles an hour. And the Arado R-234 jet bomber offered a new kind of threat entirely. Against machines like these, many believed the age of propeller-driven fighters was over. But the Tempest proved otherwise. Its blistering speed at low and medium levels allowed British pilots to catch jets during their most vulnerable moments, taking off, landing, or diving out of combat. On April 19, 1945, a Tempest scored the world's first kill against an He-162. Others brought down Me-262S and R-234S, chalking up victories that showed propellers still had a place in the jet age's dawn. Tempests also excelled in mixed skies, where piston planes and jets flew together. Pilots learned to use their superior acceleration at low levels to trap opponents, then unleash the aircraft's heavy cannons in devastating bursts. While no one doubted the future belonged to jets, the Tempest bought Britain precious time, bridging the gap between the familiar roar of the piston engine and the shriek of the turbine. For all its speed, firepower, and combat record, the Tempest never captured the public imagination the way the Spitfire did. Part of that was timing. By the time it entered service in 1944, the war in Europe was already turning in the Allies' favor. The desperate, romantic struggle of the Battle of Britain was years behind, and the press no longer needed a single symbol to rally morale. Another reason was image. The Spitfire looked graceful, almost poetic in flight, while the Tempest carried the purposeful, muscular lines of a brute built for business. To the public, one was a knight in shining armor, the other a prize fighter in work clothes. Veterans knew the truth, of course, that in the closing months of the war, no Allied propeller fighter was more feared at low altitude than the Tempest. Pilots respected its blend of stability and raw power. Historians later came to see it as the ultimate hurricane, the natural evolution of Hawker's rugged design philosophy. And yet, outside circles of enthusiasts, the Tempest remained overshadowed. The Spitfire's legend only grew in peacetime, while the Tempest faded quietly into history. Still, its record speaks for itself. Against rockets, jets, and armor alike, the Tempest proved that Hawker's line had reached its peak, a fighter that stood tall even if it stood in the shadows. In the end, the Hawker Tempest stood as the peak of Britain's piston engine fighters. It was fast, hard-hitting, and tough enough to take on everything from V-1 rockets to the Me-262 jet. History may have given the spotlight to the Spitfire, but those who flew and fought in the Tempest knew its worth. It was the ultimate form of the Hurricane line, an aircraft built not for beauty, but for victory. How about you? Do you remember reading about the Tempest, or maybe hearing stories from veterans who flew her? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear them. If you enjoyed this look back, give it a like and subscribe to join us for the next story from the golden age of aviation.